This next story is a good one, okay? It's getting kind of juicy up in here, but it's something that everybody needs to hear. And I think you guys really appreciate this. When talking about the economy, I think it's important also to address the fact that there are some states in this country that are rapidly losing residents. And for whatever reason, those happen to be blue states. But what I want to show you tonight is that it's not just about a blue state. It's about a metropolitan area that has a lot of people, and they have a lot of people because of the job market. And I'm going to sound the alarm about the warning when it comes to the states that people are leaving and the states that they're moving to. Now, things are coming back. It's all coming back to me now. A couple years ago, I warned people about this. Even last year, I've been warning people for quite some time that if we don't get these costs under control, you're looking at a lot of these coastal elite blue cities looking like some type of exodus or just becoming a playground for the rich. And that's where we're headed. And you'll see why. Shout out to Yvette Carnell for sharing this video. This is a really good video. States governed by Dems losing residents because housing is too expensive really drives home the party contradictions. I agree 90%. Glad Dems are finally getting called out for their failures. Let's get into this, guys. The mass exodus of blue states. Check this out.
Democrats have a problem that runs deeper than the 2024 election. They have a problem that runs deeper than Elon Musk's assault on the government. Look at the places they govern. Strongholds like New York and Illinois and where I'm from, California. They're losing people.
Since the pandemic started, California is seeing an exodus, a mass exodus.
In 2023, California saw a net loss of 268,000 residents. In New York, 179,000.
New York City is losing some folks, right? Some residents. But it turns out that New York State is also seeing the population drop.
And in Illinois,
the Illinois residents have been fleeing the state at an alarming rate.
The state's population has been in decline for the 10th year in a row.
Why are all these people leaving?
Pause right there. One of the states that's not mentioned that should be mentioned is Massachusetts and also Washington State. They are also in that, expensive category. Illinois is less expensive than those other ones, but Illinois is also hella cold. And also the taxes did increase in Illinois. I know a lot of people have been complaining about the tax increases, people that have left Chicago. So there's that as well. What these areas have in common is that, yes, they are hella expensive. And they also have a problem with gentrification. And that's kind of happening all over. But what you've seen over time is that people that grew up in working class or low income communities, they are no longer able to maintain their families there because a Whole Foods came in, a developer came into the neighborhood and said, let's make this a nicer place to be. So now the rent that they were used to paying, it quadruples or doubles, and they can't afford to stay there anymore. So they have to move out. Now that low income neighborhood has now become, like a yuppie neighborhood. And you got all the tech bros that live there. Boston has this issue here in Massachusetts. DC has had it. Chicago, California, we can bring up LA, more in particular San Francisco and that tech bubble, right? New York City, we know has had these issues. That's part of the reason, but there's more. Listen to this.
In surveys, the dominant reason is simply this. The cost of living is too high. It is too expensive to get childcare.
It's almost like paying another mortgage.
It is too expensive to buy a home.
Very unrealistic to be able to put a down payment on a $2 million home with 2 kids surviving.
You end up having to live too far from your work. And so they're going to places where all of that is cheaper.
Every day someone is moving to the Florida area.
She got an apartment 3 times the size of the one she had in Manhattan. Plus, there's a wraparound debt.
Yeah, I can definitely understand.
Go get that, 4-bedroom, 3-bath house I had in Texas.
Yeah.
I know these families. These families are my friends. I've lived with them in these places, and I've watched many of them move away from the place they love, the city they wanted to raise their children, because they could not afford to live there. You cannot be the party of working families when the places you govern are places working families cannot afford to live.
That is right. And they're not the party of working families. The Democratic Party has become the family of, the tech, oligarchs. They're the party of Goldman Sachs. I mean, Kamala Harris said this all on the stage herself, happy about the Goldman Sachs endorsement. That they're become the Ivy League, elite, bubble party, that type of thing. And no, that is not supporting working class families. That's not supporting, hell, I know teachers that can't afford. How much you think they pay some of these teachers? Do you know there are teachers in this country that are making $30,000 a year? Teachers have a college degree. Think about that for a second. So people are underpaid, but you're wondering, well, why did they go to those areas to begin with? Those areas weren't always as expensive as they are now. The other problem that you run into is the job market. When I graduated from college, a lot of people moved to a couple of different places. And those places were Washington, D.C., because they had entry-level jobs for college students where you could just get it like that and they train you and you're working for the federal government in some way, shape, or form, doing some kind of damn job in D.C. So there were a lot of people that took that path and you knew you were going to get good benefits working for the federal government. Washington, D.C. was one. New York City was another one. See, these cities all have stuff in common. Boston, so maybe if you were already in the Northeast, but at the time it was New York, DC, some people would go to Houston, like that type of thing. But there were certain areas where the job market was really thriving and it was really hot. Now what happens is you have a metropolitan area that has an enormous amount of people because of the job market is part of the reason, but you end up with this problem because you have so many people, you have a higher demand for housing. So if the demand for housing is higher, the price is going to increase. That's where some of that comes in. We are seriously heading down a dangerous path where San Francisco was no longer home to working class people anymore, where you got to have 4 and 5 roommates just to have an apartment. We're going down a dangerous path when Oakland doesn't even look like what it used to look like back in the 80s or the 70s. And a lot of the black population has been driven out because they can't afford to live there because the tech bros came in. And that is spread to places like San Jose. It's not just San Francisco. It's not just Oakland. It spreads. You see it here in Massachusetts. It's not just Boston. It spread to Cambridge, Somerville. People used to call Somerville Slummerville. Somerville now is expensive. And these things have increased over the years, so it spreads. So instead of moving to a different city in that state, people are leaving these states and they're moving to states where the cost of living is cheaper. That's also going to be a problem in the long haul.
You are not the party of working families when the places you govern are places working families cannot afford to live. In the American political system, to lose people is to lose power. If these trends hold, the 2030 census will shift the Electoral College sharply to the right. The states that Kamala Harris won in 2024 will lose House seats and Electoral College votes.
Yep.
The states that Trump won will gain them.
Yep.
So in that Electoral College, a Democrat could win every single state Harris won in 2024, and also win Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and still lose the presidency.
Everybody needs to see that. Because when people move, a lot of times they take their experiences and their frustrations with them. If you left the city because it was too expensive and you're moving somewhere cheaper, you're probably going to take that energy with you. And the new place you're moving to, whether it's a Raleigh, North Carolina, which is also starting to become more expensive, whether it's Raleigh, North Carolina, or Austin, Texas, or Nashville, or whatever, you might be a little bit more open to a different style of politics because you don't want what happened in New York to happen there. This is an alarm that he's sounding, and I feel like a lot of people need to be talking about this.
There is a policy failure haunting blue states. It has become too hard to build and too expensive to live in the places where Democrats govern. Our politics is split right now between a left that defends government even when it doesn't work, and a right that wants to destroy government even when it is working. What we need is a political party that actually makes government work. Democrats can be that party. They should be that party. But it requires them to confront what they have done to make government fail.
This is where I disagree with him. Democrats can't be that party as long as they're taking corporate money and they're attached to lobby interest groups. They can't be that party. The Democratic Party that he's speaking of existed a long time ago. That party does not exist anymore. So unless the Democratic Party is willing to forego these corporate donors, lobby interest groups, they're not going to lean back towards the working class. Right now, you see the video that I made before about the centrist third way. Their future plan for the Democratic Party is to move away from left and populist politics, which they didn't really embrace in the first damn place, except for a handful of people that were part of the squad and Bernie Sanders. Let's just keep it real. To move far away from that and to move further and further to what the Republican Party wants. So they're not moving in that direction. And as long as they have that money attached, I don't see that happening.
I could tell you a dozen stories. In my new book, I do. But let me tell you here just one. In 1982, so more than 40 years ago, California Governor Jerry Brown signed a bill to study what it would take to build a high-speed rail system across the state.
Make a choice. Change the chemistry of the country.
He liked what he saw, and so did California's voters. In 1996, California formed a high-speed rail authority to plan for construction. High-speed rail is not some futuristic technology like nuclear fusion or flying cars. Japan broke ground on high-speed rail back in 1959. You can ride on these trains elsewhere. I have ridden on these trains.
Same.
So in 2008, California's voters approved Prop 1A, which set aside $10 billion to begin construction on a high-speed rail line that would connect Los Angeles and San Francisco. It would run through the Central Valley. It would get there in under 2 hours and 40 minutes.
This is important because that means that people that live in more of these rural parts of California can still have a job in San Francisco, but they can live somewhere where it's a little bit cheaper. Like someone who lives in Bakersfield, California can probably still go to work in San Francisco if you have high-speed rail. It's actually ridiculous that we don't have high-speed rail in the United States. Europe has had this for a long time. And it's true. You can jump on the high-speed rail in France and just, boom, I'm in Germany. Boom, I'm in Spain. Like, no biggie. So our infrastructure is a big part of the problem, but it's not the only problem.
And it would cost, they thought, $33.6 billion. California's high-speed rail authority estimated we'd be able to ride that train by the year 2020. And the news kept getting better for high-speed rail. In 2009, President Barack Obama signed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act into law. That had hundreds of billions of dollars to build the infrastructure of the future. And high-speed rail in particular had captured Obama's imagination.
Imagine boarding a train in the center of a city. No racing to an airport and across a terminal, no delays, no sitting on the tarmac, no lost luggage.
This was that. Look at how long ago this was, guys. It's 2025. That's how long they've been talking about this.
No taking off your shoes. Now, all of you know this is not some fanciful pie-in-the-sky vision of the future. It is now. It is happening right now. It's been happening for decades. The problem is it's been happening elsewhere, not here.
Obama wanted it to happen here. In California, where the voters had already begun planning and funding high-speed rail, was the obvious place. And the political stars had just kept aligning. High-speed rail's foremost champion returned.
And the most expensive campaign in California history.
When Jerry Brown won back the governor's mansion almost 30 years after leaving it.
Now, 30 years later, we're within weeks of a revised business plan that will enable us to begin initial construction before the year is out.
But it didn't happen. By 2018, it was brutally clear that nothing was going to be rideable by 2020. And the cost estimate, it wasn't $33 billion anymore. It had risen and risen and risen.
Well, yeah, because it was mentioned in 2008 and then we jumped forward to 2018. So, of course, the cost was going to go up and go up. Now, he's talking about the high-speed rail issue, but that's not the only issue. And you can check out that full video if you want to as well. But there's something else that has been happening as well. Do you know that there are more people working from home right now than there were during the pandemic? I kid you not. This is another reason for those moves. Number one is the cost of living. Number two, I would point to this one. Work from home is reshaping the housing market 5 years after the pandemic. So check this out, guys. When I just fast forward through this part right about here, 5 years after the pandemic swept the world and ushered in the first stay-at-home orders in modern memory, remote work has changed our lives. Despite recent return to office mandates, far more Americans are working from home than before the pandemic, and that number is likely to grow if gradually over time. Let me break this down for you folks. If you're given the opportunity to work from home, do you really need to stay in New York City and pay almost $3,000, $4,000 a month for an apartment? If you're given the opportunity to work from home, you can live somewhere that's more affordable. Now connect this to the idea of high-speed rail. If we had both, if we had high-speed rail and you were working from home, that means every now and then, if you wanted to go into the office and you lived further away, you can hop on that high-speed rail and be there just like that. Best of both worlds. More people are opting to work from home because during the pandemic, when they got the opportunity to, and not everybody, but when some of us got the opportunity to work from home, we realized just how much we could get done. We realized how shorter our commute could be. We realized how much money we saved, how many more hours in our day we got back. We realized on our lunch break, we could throw in a load of laundry. We realized that if you had children, you didn't have to worry about, I hope my train's not late so I can get to the daycare on time and not have to pay a late fee to pick up my kid. That was work-life balance. That's why some people didn't want to, and some people did choose to go back, but that's why some people did not want to get away from working from home, because they got time back and they were able to save money, thus having less stress. Now, here's the other issue. With more people working from home, we need to talk about broadband. Because there are still places in the United States that don't have broadband internet, you guys. So they don't really have that option. They can't really work from home like that. There does need to be something done with that. And I've talked about this for quite some time. Broadband infrastructure should be all across the United States right now. There's no way in hell that in 2025, there should be a town or neighborhood in this country that does not have broadband. So that demand is going to increase. That's something you want to keep in mind. But now these people who are like working from home, I'm going to leave San Francisco, I'm going to leave New York, I'm going to leave Boston, and I'm going to go move down south to a smaller town where I can maybe try to buy a home now and get away from this rat race in the city. And it is a rat race, and a lot of them. So keep that in mind. There are a number of us during the pandemic that moved out of the city because it wasn't worth it. Why were we paying all this money in rent and everything was locked down? People live in the city because of their work commute, but when they sent us home and I was working from home for over a year, I'm like, wait a minute, why am I living here? Why are we living in the city, paying all this rent, and all this stuff is shut down? We can't go do the things we like to do. I'm working from home. We're just throwing money away. People have been moving to places, and I'm going to tell you the places that they're moving to. In the process, housing has changed too. Where we live, how we live, even why we make the choices we do. For many of us, very different from anything we could have imagined in 2019. The housing market observers see the pandemic as a moment of flux, which many Americans seized on to redefine their living arrangements. There really was this moment in 2020 where people really knew what was wrong with their houses. And this is Rana. She's from Somerville, which is where I used to live. And they wanted to move. In some cases, that meant a home with another bedroom. For other people, it meant a different community altogether. And then we already talked about the flexibility that comes with remote work. Now we need to talk about where people are moving. This is the National Low Income Housing Coalition report, the Out of Reach report. This is published every July. And you guys, if you're an oldie but goodie with me, you've seen me talk about this multiple times before, and you have seen this map. Every year, this map increases because every year the cost of living continues to go up. So the states that they're moving from, we talk about California. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can see right there in California, in order for you to have a modest, by the way, this is modest, 2-bedroom rental, you need to make $47.38 an hour. You see why people leave in California? If you are making minimum wage in California, you have to work 118 hours a week to get a 2-bedroom rental. That's why they leave in California. Here's why they're leaving Massachusetts. We're second. Did you guys know that? Did you know that New York is not second anymore? Massachusetts, you have to make $44.84 an hour for a 2-bedroom rental here. If you make minimum wage, you have to work 120 hours a week for a 2-bedroom rental. Honey, I live here. I can tell you it's true. This is insane. New York is third. In New York, you have to make $44.77 an hour for a 2-bedroom. You have to work 119 hours a week to get a 2-bedroom rental home. Okay? They mentioned Illinois. Illinois is not as expensive as the others. It's 21st. It's ranked 21st in cost of living. But you have to make $28.81 an hour for a 2-bedroom rental. You have to work 82 hours a week if you make minimum wage for a 2-bedroom rental. The problem that Illinois runs into is, number one, it's cold as hell. And then number two, the taxes. Remember, a lot of people have been complaining about the tax increases in Illinois. And that's another reason why people have been leaving. A lot of times, people talk about it, but this is just the reality. And I also said Washington State. I think they should have mentioned that one too. Washington State is ranked 5th highest housing wage. You have to make $40.32 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom home rental. And you have to work 99 hours a week if you make minimum wage to afford that 2-bedroom. I've gone through so many of these states over the years, and every year it continues to increase. For those of you who live in that DC area, where my family is originally from, even if you were to look at Maryland, for example, even Maryland is ranked 9th. Like, this is what I'm saying. These places are not sustainable. Now, people point to them and they say they're blue states, but the reality is these are places that have cities that have a large metropolitan area where there's a lot of jobs there and a lot of people live there. So the more people that you have, the cost of living is going to increase because there's going to be a higher demand for housing. In particular, in places like Boston and New York City, we don't have a lot of land to work with. So when they build up. There's not a lot to work with. It's different in Texas. You have more land. But I mentioned Texas for a reason. Texas is another state, one of those states that people have been moving to. And I've been sounding an alarm about this. Texas also has a pretty decent job market. Houston, Dallas, there's a lot of jobs in Houston and in Dallas. But I'm going to give you a warning. Because you see, a lot of people from California are moving to Texas. Texas is ranked 23rd. It wasn't always ranked 23rd. I'm trying to show you how the cost of living is starting to increase even in these states that people are moving to. So in Texas, you need to make $27.88 an hour for a 2-bedroom rental. If you make minimum wage, you need to work 154 hours a week for that 2-bedroom rental. So if you see that here for Texas, okay, if this continues, and mark my words, someone can timestamp this. If the trend of people moving from California continues, of them moving to Texas, Texas is also going to become unaffordable. I know because I saw this happen in North Carolina. So the solution, which they'll tell you just move somewhere else, that'll work for the time being. But eventually, if everybody keeps moving to Houston, if everyone keeps moving to Dallas, if everyone keeps moving to Austin, Texas, which was like a fad, like a couple years ago, everybody was like, go to Austin and keep it weird. These places are going to become unaffordable too. You're just passing one to another, right? So let's look at another one here. Tennessee. This is another state that people are moving to. It is not uncommon for people from Chicago, Illinois, to move to Tennessee. Tennessee, and Nashville in particular, is ranked 29th, right? Highest housing wage. You need $24.31 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom rental. You need to work 134 hours a week to afford a 2-bedroom rental if you are making minimum wage. Now, that's not as high as some of the other places, but Sabby has a friend, one of my best friends from high school, who lives in the Nashville area, moved for a little bit further out because it started to become expensive. And I'm trying to tell you, the influx of people that have moved from northern states to Nashville, Tennessee is insane. You can't go out one night and not run into bridal parties, everything. It's so different. I visited her back in 2011. I was able to walk around downtown Nashville, sidewalks, freedom, that type of thing. When I went back for her wedding and we went to downtown Nashville, I believe this was 2018, there was no room on the sidewalks. Nashville has also become very flooded. A lot of people have moved in. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the East. And mark my words, I'm trying to warn you guys, if this trend continues, that is going to become unaffordable as well. I gave people the warning about this with North Carolina. Now, Charlotte, North Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina are not cheap places to live anymore. They used to be more, affordable. It's not that way. I went to high school in North Carolina. Now that's becoming more, and follow the trends. All of the snowbirds that like to move to Florida. Florida is now ranked 10th. What's happening here? 10th. So it's not just blue states. See, this is the thing. So Ron DeSantis, hon, you running into an issue here with your state. Because a lot of people have moved there. We ain't even gonna get into Hawaii. You guys know Hawaii is mad expensive. The reality is this, folks. These places have become unaffordable. And when people can't afford to live there anymore, they're gonna try to move somewhere that's more affordable. And then what happens to those cities? We're looking at the possibility of these cities becoming a playground for the rich. That's what happened to San Francisco. I can see it starting to happen in Boston. Why is it that a city that has all these colleges has rent that's that expensive? So something really do need to change. The exodus that is happening, it's not new. It's been taking place over the years, but it has continued to increase. And I remember the first time I talked about how people were leaving these areas and sounding the alarm that these places that they're moving to are going to increase and the cost of living is going to increase because there's an influx of people coming in. So it's all coming back to me now. When I saw that video, I'm like, this is all coming back, sounding the alarm. And then you end up with dead cities because when the people leave, it's only a matter of time that some of these jobs are going to leave. And then you look around and maybe that's how you get a city like Detroit. Detroit was once a thriving city where people had homes and people had jobs, whether they were working at a factory or whether they were hoping to work at Motown. Detroit wasn't the way it is today. The jobs left, the people left. And that's how you get that way. So if more people are working from home, what happens to some of these companies that kind of really require you to be in the office in order for them to make a profit off of the real estate? And what direction is this country going into? More younger people are moving to places like Michigan, like Ann Arbor, Michigan, or Madison, Wisconsin. They're no longer fleeing to places like Charlotte, North Carolina, or San Diego. They're trying to go to places that are cheap, but still may have something to do and have job opportunities. People are on the run. So it's something to think about. California is probably the one that should be the biggest one on your radar, because that's been happening for years. And I don't know what Gavin Newsom has to say about that. I really don't. But something needs to be done here. Let's go to some of the comments here, ladies and gentlemen. Chantha says, stay away from San Diego. We don't want you here. And I've heard that from people too, like, do not come here. And it's too expensive to live in blue states. I used to live in New York, born and bred all my life. Yeah, New York is expensive. It's like, I'll go visit New York, but I couldn't afford to live there. And I lived there before years ago. JB, we're going through a population explosion here in Florida, but now our cost of living is skyrocketing because they're moving here. Told you guys. Jasmine, thank you for the super sticker. Brenda, right. We need more market baskets in the city, but Demoulas only goes where they can buy land. For those who don't know, Market Basket is a grocery store chain here. It's the cheapest one. Nubian Net says Oakland has black tech bros too. That's true. Skylar, the same thing happened in Southern California, especially in areas like Inglewood, Hawthorne, and certain parts of LA proper. I shudder to think about what might happen to Altadena after the fires. I've been wondering about that as well. Black Ronin says Providence, Rhode Island has the fastest rising rental cost in the country, mostly because of people moving down from Boston. And Providence is small. Thank you, Justin. There is a party for the left, and it has an awesome platform that finished in third place, even above the Libertarian Party. It's called the Green Party. That is true, Justin. Thanks, Melanie. I heard that Elon's Hyperloop thing was a scam to keep putting off high-speed rail so more people would buy cars. So many levels to this. I could see that as well. You know, it's all about money. Thank you, Troy, the good old do-nothing Democrats. Thank you, John. Ever notice how movies once hated get reevaluated? Like how George W. Bush is viewed differently due to Donald Trump. Example, Star Wars prequel trilogy equals Bush. Star Wars sequel trilogy equals Trump. That's a good analogy there. Hey, I see somebody else like Star Wars. Whoop, whoop. Thank you, Naya. Tech locations are opening in the South, but Southerners don't have the education for these jobs. Northerners and Westerners come to take these jobs. Yep. Dr. Dre. Sabby for president 2028. Oh, not Sabby. Not Sabby. Thank you, Egg. Sorry, not sorry. The tax increases here in Chicago came because the mayor and the government chose to overfund the migrants and not its own inhabitants. I heard about those tax increases in Chicago over 5 years ago, though. But thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Been to Chicago, Illinois, not much colder than Oregon. Interesting. Thanks, Troy. Your input on rent control, anti-free market. I agree with rent control, but I've been told multiple times, like, we couldn't implement it right now in Boston, but there does need to be some type of rent stabilization. There's no rent stability in Boston, which means the landlords can increase the rent by as much as they want. That needs to change, you know? Thank you, China. Florida is thinking about getting rid of property taxes. Thoughts? Interesting. We'll see if that happens. Like I said, with the cost of living in Florida now increasing, I don't know. Oh, my uncle did this. Brenda says, my friend in Phoenix, an old boss, retired, could not afford to live there anymore. He relocated to Thailand and got himself a place to live and a live-in girlfriend. My uncle moved to Thailand too. I'm not kidding. My uncle moved to Thailand years ago and said, F this business. He came back to visit a couple years ago, but he was just like, screw this. I'm done with the US. Yeah. We are living in interesting times. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.